Alright, so I ran into another find on Craigslist, and looks to be in pretty good shape here, so I'm going to check it out. It has kind of a neat little story to it. You can see, so it's a Craftsman YT3000. Has the Craftsman Platinum 21 horsepower. Looks like a single piston engine. So 21 horsepower and a 42-inch deck. I mean, everything looks in good shape. The seat could probably be, needs a little repair here. But everything, the body, everything looks pretty decent. I don't know how old the battery is, but I'm sure I can put it on the charger, see if it'll hold a charge. All the tires look like they're in great shape. The mowing deck, after a little cleanup, it all looks pretty good. The belts are in good shape. There's no rust on the mowing deck. The spindles are solid. And the blades, yeah, the blades look good. There's no nicks. I mean, it's in really good shape, right? So, and this is the stage that I got it in. He had already yanked the engine, and you can see he took the head off. The piston looks good. You can even see the crisscrossing here still there. I don't know how many hours this thing says. I'll have to look it up and see. I don't see any counter, unless it's an LED or something. Now it doesn't look like it. But anyway, so I'll have to look at that a little closer. I don't know how many hours are on it, but he took the engine off, and he was saying it was really hard to crank over, and he was suspecting that it was the the compression release on the camshaft. That's what he was suspecting. So he doesn't really know. But he went ahead and took everything apart, and I guess he got to this stage, this part of it, and said, that's enough, that was it. So if it does need to be replaced, well, half of it's already done. He's already yanked the engine, and everything's here. There's the carburetor. Looks like the exhaust pipe. Yeah, everything's, there's the head gasket, there's the head. It looks to be in good shape. There's the valve cover. So, what to do, if he's thinking it's, should I take it just out of from what he said and just think, well, just got to replace the cam in there, and just go ahead and break it open while I have this while it's off. Just go ahead and break it open and see what it looks like inside, and see if it does need to be replaced. If so, I'll do so. Or should I put the engine back together and see what it feels like? Just rotate it around and see, and just for my 2 cents worth, and see if it's if I think it is that compression release, or from what he was saying, it could have been the valves. It could have been valves that just needed adjusting or something, but I don't know. I'll think about that one, but for the most part, this is a very decent mower, very decent riding mower. And if I'm not mistaken, let's see what year this is. Yeah, 2012. So it's not that old. It's a Craftsman, I believe this one. Yeah, here it is, Husqvarna. So made by Husqvarna, and it's hydrostatic. Everything you'd think about. I wish it had the hydrostatic, you know, the foot pedals on it instead of that. I like the, but who cares? I'm probably just gonna repair it, fix it up, and sell it off. So I just got to decide what I'm gonna do with that over there. Alright, well, you can see I decided to go ahead and put the engine back together and test it out myself just to make sure. And I'm just snugging down the head, not putting it down too tight at the moment, especially not with that impact wrench. I just want to, you know, just get them on there snug and tighten them up later. You know, if I decide to continue putting it together, I'll torque it down properly, but the head gaskets are in good shape, so no problem. And there's the rods, and as usual, make sure you put the steel rod on the exhaust and the aluminum rod on the intake. So you can see I kept fiddling around with the exhaust valve there. It seemed pretty tight, you know, and I was just trying to make sure I had the rod inserted correctly. And on the intake one, that top one, it just popped right in and it was no problem. And you just make sure you put those little caps on there. And that bottom one for the exhaust, it was just so tight, you know. I could have loosened it up a bit, but I just kept fighting it, and even dropped it there at one point. But it finally got all put together. Just had to really compress that spring down, which, you know, when I was looking at it further, well, it was already compressed. So you can see how loose the top was there, and the bottom one just not moving at all. That exhaust one was just very tight. So I decided to find the top dead center there, just spin her around, and there's top dead center, and then I just backed off a little bit. And since I was messing with the valves, you know, if I'm going to start gapping them, I said, well, I guess I better, you know, snug the head down tight where they should be, just to make sure the gapping is going to be correct. And then with the valve, as usual, it has that little set screw, and then the big nut that adjusts your actual clearance. So I had to tighten that down quite a bit. You can see how loose it was. And got the feeler gauge out, and I believe I'd set it around, I can't remember if it was 5 or, I think I've set it at 6 thousandths. And tighten down the set screw. And that was about right. So that bottom one, it was really tight. You know, I got the set screw off, and when you watch as I back off on that bolt, you can see the spring already decompressing there as I rotated it around. I just wanted to double check, make sure everything's tight, and then double check the gaps, and make sure they feel good. And that was about right. It could almost hold its own weight there. So after that, I started rotating around, and it looks like everything was moving the way it should. And you can see as it rolls around there, it has that one little stutter. So I think that little compression release was okay. So I went and put the spark plug back on so I can rotate it around and make sure I feel some compression as I'm rotating it. And you can see as I rotate it, then it'll kick in. You can feel the compression there. So everything looked good to me, so I just went ahead and decided to put the valve cover back on, and I just wrapped a towel in there so that I wouldn't get all that gasket material all over the place. So I just cleaned off both surfaces, and I did the same thing on the cover, and then spread some gasket material on there. And you can see I'm just gonna barely put them on. I didn't want to get it too tight. It was still, you know, pretty wet. I want to let that gasket material kind of start to dry and, you know, get tacky and start to get a little more firm before I tighten it down. And you can see I'm just kind of barely getting them on, and I just wait for that stuff to dry up and get tacky. And I guess while I was waiting, I started looking at the flywheel and noticing all the rust, and decided to go ahead and check the magneto and the magnet on the flywheel and make sure they're good and clean. Might as well, you know, while it's all out. And there was some rust. It wasn't bad, but I might as well just clean them off. And you can see the piece of, you know, sandpaper I use. It's actually that came off of a belt sander. And I use that because, you know, you can pick whatever, you know, 120 grit or 80 grit, whatever you want, but the backing on this stuff is really more tough than just, you know, just a sheet of sandpaper. And I use that stuff quite a bit. and then cleaned off the magnet and all that good stuff. The magnet actually had quite a bit of rust on it. So I was putting the magneto back on, and I didn't go all the way around the flywheel. I mean, it was just, guess no use in that. But as long as the magnet end of it and your poles on the magneto is clean, you should be getting a good, clean signal and spark and everything. And so I was getting it in place, and then I was going to gap it properly. And you can see I use a product tag. It's about the same thickness as a business card, and I just use that because I have so many of them, and they work quite well. And if I lose them, no big deal. But so I got it in place, put the magnet behind it, and tighten everything down. And just double check, make sure it looks good, make sure there's a proper gap there. So it was ready to put on, and I started looking at the tractor itself and everything. Decided, well, I guess before I start putting it back on, I could give it a good cleaning. And same thing on the mowing deck. So I decided to just go ahead and power wash everything off and get all that stuff prepped, get ready for the motor. And after the power wash, you can see it looks pretty good. It's there's not a lot of rust, hardly any at all. Everything cleaned up pretty well. And so I was just going to let it dry and move it over to a different spot where I can start putting the motor back on. And there's the engine. You just stick it on there, line it up, and you can see where I kind of moved it around. But the grass everywhere else was still kind of wet from rain a few days ago, and so I just put a tarp under there so I can crawl underneath and bolt the engine down. Just 4 bolts, and it was on. Now the engine's bolted on, and I can put it up on the lift and lift it up a little bit, and it'll be a little easier to work with. A little better access to everything. Now that lift just really comes in handy sometimes. So it was just starting to assemble, and I started out, with just the exhaust pipe, because it just inserts down in the muffler, and there's the 2 Allen screws that hold that exhaust pipe in place. And there's the carburetor assembly, the intake assembly and everything. And I was looking at it going, well, I guess I better, clean it up a bit and make sure the carburetor's in good shape. I just wanted to take a look at it just to make sure. And I'm glad I did, because when I took it off, it all mostly looked pretty good, but you can see the sediment and everything that had settled down at the bottom of the bowl. And usually when it does that, you got to make sure that fuel solenoid is still operating. Sometimes, when everything gets settled down there at the bottom, that's right there where that solenoid rod's going up and down, and it gets hung up a lot of times. But everything else was pretty clean. I just, flushed everything out, made sure the jets were nice and open, and just put it all back together. So I was just putting everything where they should be. That was the cable for the blade engagement. Insert it through there and make sure it's ready for the mowing deck when that time comes. And it's just test fitting everything, just placing the carburetor where it should be and making sure all the linkage and everything is there, and everything's going to fit correctly. But you can see that governor rod there, it was just bent all to hell. So I just bent it back the best I could. It's actually not that hard to do. It came out pretty straight. It lined up perfectly. And there's the throttle cable, and I was just making sure, where it inserts in and mounts and everything. Everything's lining up the way it should. But then I started looking at, with the throttle going back and forth like that, and I kept looking around. It's like, well, something is missing. There's a throttle goes in, that's no problem. But as that linkage is going back and forth, it's not doing anything. And so I started looking around. And I looked in a little bowl of goodies, and nothing was there. There was no other linkage. But lo and behold, I went to the back of the truck, and there it was. I'm lucky I found it. I guess it had come off, or when I was transporting everything around. And but that was it. That was the little the choke control, so that when you have the throttle all the way up and then over, it engages the choke. So that was it. Everything was there. So I started to go ahead and attaching all the linkage and everything where they should be, making sure everything's going in the right hole, and then mounting the carburetor and the throttle cable, all that good stuff, and just doing a preliminary placement until I can adjust the throttle accordingly. And once all that was in, then don't forget the gas, the fuel solenoid there. But and decided to go ahead and put a new fuel filter on it also while it was all in front of me. So I got that done, and then connected the fuel solenoid. And the other side there was actually pretty easy. It was just disconnecting your wire harness there, and it was just that one single harness. Remember, this one has the manual blade engagement. It doesn't have the electronic clutch or anything like that. So it was just plugging it in and then attaching the starter. So then I was test fitting that top cover there and seeing where that little front bracket screws onto the engine, and then the top cover screws down onto that bracket. So I was just making sure everything was lining up and going where it should. And then the spark plug cable also, making sure that it's being routed through there. It's not going to get pinched, or it's not going to sit there and rest against the exhaust pipe and burn up. But it all ended up, getting together pretty nicely. So I lowered the lift, and I was going to check the oil. Kind of anxious. I was dying to get that thing started, but Apparently he had drained the oil in it before, at some point, you know, when he took the engine out. So I just replaced the oil, no problem. Alright, it cranked up with no problem at all. It just sounded like I needed to adjust the carburetor linkage here and maybe the governor. Seemed like it was revving pretty high. So I'll kick this back a little bit and make sure the governor's going pretty good. But yeah, the engine sounded really strong. It backfired a little bit there, and a lot of the smoke was coming from the muffler. Everything, yeah, you can see some of it coming down there. So everything's burning off the case of the muffler there underneath. Must have spilled some oil or something. But yeah, so it wasn't the compression release. I'm glad I decided to put it back together and check everything myself, and it turns out it was just the exhaust valve was just so tight it wasn't budging at all. And so I just did a quick valve job on it, and that was it. So the next thing is just hooking up the mowing deck to it, and I'll probably do something with the seat, see if I can get it to compress back down or something. I've done this before, but this one looks pretty tight. It might be kind of hard to mash that back. But all right, well, that wasn't too bad of a Craigslist find there, was it? I was just you know, just kind of disheartening to see the engine in pieces before I even got it. But you know, I just wanted to see for myself, and sure enough, got it running with just a valve job, and that's it. You know, got new oil in it, new gas, new gas filter, and I'm just gonna connect the mowing deck and make sure that it's working fine. But I'm sure it is, because it's in pretty good shape. So this thing is just ready to put together, and I'll fool with the seat a little bit. But other than that, that was a good little find there on Craigslist, and about 4 hours of work, I guess, 4, maybe 5. But that's it. So I'll call it a day for this video. So thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and watch for my next video.